Okay, well, you're the host. Okay, that's awesome. Okay, cool. And then I'm going to go back to sharing.
Oh, it says
screen.
request host to start the recording.
Okay, recording. Oh, start recording. Well, it says pause or stop from recording.
Yep, we're recording.
Okay, cool. Good start. Jumping back to the slides. Starting.
Real work starts with real people. And
Okay.
need to connect to people.
Good.
And Sintia is trying to get on our Teams because I send it as an invite and everybody thinks it's a team. So she should be on in a minute.
Okay. The irony is that when I'm sharing, that's all right. I can go back and forth between sharing. Obviously, I know how to do that. So, but like when I'm sharing, I can't even see participants or anything, which is no big deal.
Yeah, I mean, you're just given updates, and then hopefully Sintia will be able to do more on her end.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. So going back to the slides, then we go straight into Sintia. So after the webinar recordings, we speak about that they're available on the website. We talk very briefly about what repairing schools. People know that, and then we introduce Sintia. Perfect. And then after that, then we go to the last summer webinar, talk about that, and then we adjourn. Okay, good.
Yeah, and one announcement that you're welcome to make on that last slide is that there will be a new calendar invite coming out for the academic year calls, and they're monthly, starting in September.
Okay, cool.
But it's the same
new
time.
Calendar coming out, and they'll be monthly.
Yeah.
Great. Thank you so much, Remy. Appreciate
You're
that.
welcome.
How's Colorado treating you?
It's really great. We're this is the Women in Solar Energy Luncheon.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, and I'm hanging out with Trudy, so
Oh, give her a hug for me.
I sure will.
I haven't seen her in so long.
And
she
we're
didn't
going...
make it to DWIA,
Yeah, I know. And then I'll be having dinner with Ian this evening, so that'll be nice.
Oh, amazing. Okay. I just had a nice call with them today.
Good. Well, Sintia, it's good to meet you virtually. I'm going to be hopping off and Charles is going to be hosting this one, as you know, but I'll say my quick hellos and then let you guys take it from there. And hopefully we'll have some students show up. And if, our attendance is sometimes low, but we still record them and put them on the YouTube and they get a lot of views. So hopefully you'll get a couple students to join us today.
Yeah.
And Sintia and I, sorry, Sintia. She and I had a nice call this morning, on Monday this week. And I gave her that warning and I said, these are recorded, and dozens of people then review them after the fact because we live in an asynchronous streaming world and less than people showing up. No big deal.
We appreciate you being here, and I know it'll be fantastic, and I'll look forward to listening to it later myself.
Yeah, no, thank you both for the opportunity.
You bet. Okay, I'm gonna let you guys go.
Thanks, Remy. Enjoy your time. Have a good lunch.
Thank you.
Okay, cheers. Cindy, nice to see you again.
Yeah, nice seeing you. Charles, looks like maybe you found a different spot. I think you were thinking it was going to be at the Whole Foods.
I was. And then I left because it was so noisy in there. So now I'm just like literally outside the Whole Foods. Here, I'll show you where I am. I have to turn off my background effects. None. There we go. There we go. So there's a Penn Station over there and Moynihan something or other. And then over there is where sort of Hudson Yards is, which apparently was this big development. I can't remember, but it kind of came out of nowhere. And it's famous. I don't know why, but it's the top end of the High Line. I don't know if have you spent any time on the High Line in New York?
I have not, no.
It's kind of cool. It's a railroad spur, if you will, that's at like 20 feet above street level. It was an elevated spur and it sent trains into buildings. Mm-hmm. So like there'll be like these things that go like right into a building and then they've like bricked off where it used to go in. It's kind of cool. And it goes, I don't know, several blocks, multiple blocks down in sort of eastern side It's a very nice walking platform. Super. It's so popular that they actually have to limit the people that can come onto it.
Oh, wow, okay.
Yeah. Yeah. Craziness.
So where do
Um,
you reside, Charles, and there in Pennsylvania?
no, normally I'm in Denver, Colorado.
Oh,
Yeah.
gotcha.
But it's end of summer. It's the one last chance to go and see all your kids in the summer before I don't know why you have to go see them in the summer. Our son he had a weekend off, which is a rare thing. Because he's a resident at Jefferson Health System in Abington. And he never gets like 2 days off at a time. So we're like, oh, we knew it was gonna happen. We're like, oh, we're gonna come in because otherwise we're not gonna see you until whenever, it'll be months. And then our daughter just moved to a new place in Fort Greene, which is sort of a neighborhood in
Mhm.
eastern Brooklyn, western Brooklyn, down towards Barclay Center. So we had to go and see her new place. That's all it is. Just like quick end of summer tour.
Nice.
Yeah. And you're in DC itself? Like your office, where are your offices?
I am, yeah. So our office is downtown. It's a few blocks from the White House. So we're right in the center of things. We have a hybrid system. So today I decided to work from home. But yeah, I've been in DC for the last 10 years.
Ooh. And where do you live physically?
So I live right borderline to Maryland. Are you familiar with DC?
A little bit. I mean, I grew up in Northern Virginia, though. So when you talk about DC, Maryland borders, I'm like, oh, I can see it on a map.
Yeah, so I live a couple of stops before Silver Spring.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Fort Taunton area, it's all residential. It's kind of nice to get away from the hectic downtown after a long day at work.
Totally. So do you take the metro out?
I do, yeah. So it's actually like a 3-minute walk from my apartment, and the stop is right underneath my office. So
Oh my word. How easy is that? That's insane.
yeah.
I worked for a few years at DOE headquarters at Forrestal on the south side. Um, and I lived in Vienna, town of Vienna, Tyson's Corner. And it was a 40-minute drive or something like that, but it was like an hour and a half on the metro.
Oh, wow.
It was not conducive to that. It's like I don't feel like doing that.
Yeah,
So
it doesn't take me more than 20, maybe 25 minutes max from the time I
that
leave
is
my apartment to the time that I'm at my desk.
that's amazing. That's public transportation at its best. That's really good.
Yep.
Well, I think we should record. This is being recorded for posterity. So, given that it's 5 minutes after, I think we should just jump into it. If you're okay. And you and I kind of started this before when I was like, "This is what the call is going to be like." So we can just jump in, and if you don't mind, I'll make a few comments about what I observed from your career, and then we'll jump in and just start interviewing. Is that okay?
Yeah, just one question. How do I share my screen? Because I had put a presentation. We obviously don't have to follow it through, but just sort of a guide, and then obviously jump in with questions where you want me to elaborate.
Yeah, I think
I'm trying
let's
to.
see. Do I have control over the share? I should share. I think there's a couple slides I'm supposed to share first, and then I'll introduce you, and then you can share slides. There's a little green up arrow in the bottom center-ish that says share.
Ah, I see it now. Yes,
Yeah.
thank you.
Yeah. And then when it comes time, then I think hopefully you'll be able to share and I don't have to enable it. But
Okay.
if I have to enable it, then I'll just make you the host. That's the easiest way to do it.
Okay.
Okay, so now given all that, I'll start doing the official business and share a couple slides about start broadcast. Hopefully this works. There we go. I'm going to jump over here and just sort of welcome everyone to our penultimate summer webinar series talk. It's the next one is next week. This week, we've got Remy, who usually does these interviews, and she's at the ACES conference, American Solar Energy Society in Boulder, Colorado. And for those that are unfamiliar with ACES versus SIA, SIA is an industry association, which is, advocacy, lobbying, education, trade shows, that kind of thing. Whereas ACES has more academic roots, I think. It's the American Solar Energy Society. It has more scientists, it has more technical papers, less commercial. But I think it has student chapters and it has great leadership. And the folks that are on the board, I feel like are much more researchy than they are commercial. I hope that's true and I'm not talking too out of turn. So in those photographs, you can see a lecture hall at ACES, but then the bottom one is actually kind of fun. So that's Jack's Solar Garden, north of Boulder a little ways. That's one of our few front range agrivoltaics demonstration sites. And it was produced with the support of NREL, which is kind of neat, back when NREL was doing those kinds of things. And maybe they will return for it, but feels like we're not so sure what's happening with that going forward. There's a handful of upcoming events that are worth thinking about. The nearest one is RE Plus in Las Vegas. That's the big industry meeting from SIA, the commercial side. And it is, I'm sure you've been to that, Cynthia, and it is an absolute bonkers zoo with tens of thousands of people. It is an overwhelming event if you let it be. But I encourage anyone considering it to not let it be. That just because there's 30,000 people in a room doesn't mean that's not 30,000 individuals. And that's always a really important component when you're talking about and thinking about, meeting people, visiting places like NREL or other institutes, talking to people like yourself, Cynthia, at companies, that they're people. It's not a mob. It's 30,000 individuals, each who has a neat career story, or is looking for a job, or is trying to sell a product, or whatever it is. It's really cool. And so it's just like a smorgasbord of people to talk to. And Repowering Schools actually sponsors a number of people to go to that show. So if you haven't yet thought about that, reach out to Repowering Schools and Remy, and she can help you with that. After that is the leadership forum with RISE. And if we don't talk about RISE enough, then shame on us, because RISE is one of these 20-year institutions that really came out of Women of Wind Energy. It was a handful of real superstars in the industry who looked around the room and said, where are the women? And said, hey, how about if we make a luncheon for women in the industry? And I was lucky to be there at that first luncheon. And it was the coolest thing. There's like 50 or 60 women out of 20,000 men. It was a small gathering of women. And they said, this is the cool thing. We should support women who want to get into the wind energy industry at that time. And over time, it grew to be Women of Renewable Industries and Sustainable Energy, because companies were doing both suddenly, and it made sense. But RISE is an amazing thing. And then the leadership forum is this fall annual deal, and it is the executives, but it's not just for the executives. It's just these powerhouses, the best of the best, the brightest of the brightest, the leaders talking about what they do, where they do it, why they do it, how they do it, and how more people can get involved. And it is really an inspirational event to go to. The next one in February is the Offshore Conference in New York in February, mid-February. And Repowering Schools will also have a showing there. And then finally, DWEA is it's a mini conference. And Soul Systems has always been really great to us and hosted tours of their facilities and their building. It's always on lobby day, so I never get to go, but that's all right. I'm jealous of the people that get to see it, because it sounds like an amazing spot. But DWEA, what's fun about DWEA is those that are interested in the industry, it's like the cottage side of the wind industry. It's the small companies doing distributed projects, not all using small turbines, but all small projects that are smaller than 20 or 30 megawatts kind of thing. It's the stuff that's on the distribution network, not on the transmission network. So by definition, they tend to be smaller, which Cynthia will share in her story why she doesn't do, maybe, why not 20 or 120 megawatt solar arrays, is because the small stuff actually has a fun place and you learn different things. And it appeals to different people. And so DWIA is the wind version of residential solar, if you will, somewhat, and you learn different things there. And then finally, a reminder that all of these conversations are recorded so that you can come back, and I think most people actually will be showing up, listening to the recordings as opposed to doing it live. But the advantage of that is that you can put them on 1.25 and it will sound smarter. How about that? It's all good. Not that Cynthia needs that, but I do. And then finally, just a reminder, here's how you can get to the recordings, but you can also get to them straight from our website. And then finally, we'll introduce Cynthia. And so Cynthia is with Soul Systems. She's the assistant vice president. That assistant sounds wrong.
Associate Vice President.
Associate, thank you. There we go. I apologize, of construction. But what's really fun, that when I look through your LinkedIn profile, what appealed to me, Cynthia, is that there's a number of us who have kind of a wandering nature to our careers. And it makes it feel like if you don't know how to connect dots of your own, then you're never going to make it in here. When you talk to people who have a wandering thing, it's like, God, that sounds complicated. How are you ever going to do that? Whereas Cynthia is one of these people who has a very logical career path. And it's just encouraging to see somebody who has been with a company and served different roles over time for a couple of years, and then said, I'm ready for the next thing. And then to have a company that supports that ascendance to the next thing. And over time, you continue to pick up more and more skills. It is a traditional way and a very tried and true way of learning things, which I think is really, really cool. And then I think it tells you something about the company that Cynthia works for, and that it is a place where you can find a home and be there for a while, and that the company is supportive and you want to work there. That says a lot, as opposed to people who come in and out, and we have a lot of turnover. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing if I can, figure out how to do that. And then I'm going to hand it off to you, Cynthia, to give a little bit about you and your company, and then we'll go into the interview section if that's okay.
Yeah, sounds good. Thanks for that introduction, Charles. Let me share my screen here, and then we'll get started. So, Charles, feel free to stop me at any point if you have any questions, if there's anything that you'd like me to elaborate on. But good to see everyone. As Charles, you were making the announcements, I'm actually going to be at RISE, the RISE Leadership Forum in October. I'm going to be a speaker there. So anyone who's listening to this recording, if you do attend that forum, I am more than happy to connect with you in person there as well. All right, so brief agenda that I have here. I'll introduce myself, talk a little bit more about who I am, how I've gotten to my current role. I'll talk a little bit about solar construction here at Soul Systems, what it means to be a VP, how you get to that point, specifically, again, in construction, and then any additional questions that Charles, others have at the end. We can go through those, but let's see, introduction, a little bit about myself. I'm originally from California, Central Valley, Fresno, California. So I went to school there at Fresno State. I obtained my Bachelor in Science degree in mechanical engineering, and then ended up moving to DC right after I completed my degree, and started a master's in engineering management at George Washington University. I was already thinking about some sort of project management role when I completed my bachelor degree, and I thought engineering management would help me get to that point. So during that time, I also started work at Solar City. For those of you who may not know, Solar City was a big solar company several years ago. They were very big on residential. So I was there as a residential design engineer, working on residential systems all over the country. Did that for a year. It was great. I was applying a lot of the engineering that I had learned in school. But again, ultimately, I wanted to do more of project management than actual design and engineering work. So I moved over to Sol Systems, where I've held various roles, and I'll go in more detail on those here shortly. All right, so as Charles mentioned, I have had a very linear path in my career. Since very early on, I knew that I wanted to be in the project management space within renewable energy, specifically solar. So when I transitioned from Solar City to Sol Systems, I applied for a project coordinator role to get my foot in the door into project management. So my focus during that period was to provide administrative support to the project managers. It was a great way for me to understand, as a project manager, what do we need to look at? What do we need to ensure happens for schedule, for scope, for budget to build these projects? And those projects were all distributed generation focused. So ground mounts, rooftops, canopies, typically between 1 to 10 megawatts in size. So I did that for about 6 months, learned a lot, applied a lot of what I was learning. And within those 6 months, I was able to then move over to a project manager role. At that point, I took over one of our national accounts, Amazon and Walmart. So I was coordinating and managing those projects that we were building with these two large customers. I did that for a couple of years, again, learned a lot, and moved over to a senior project management role. And within those roles, I then had a project coordinator, more or less report up to me. And so I was starting to learn as well, not only project management of these solar projects, but as well as managing internal employees, becoming a manager, a leader within the company. Our pipeline of distributed generation projects really started to grow between as I took that senior project manager role. And so I moved on to a program manager role. So at that point, I was overseeing several project managers while still managing projects myself, to ensure that we were building the same processes for all of these projects. These projects can be very different, especially a rooftop versus a ground mount. There are specific surveys, reports that are needed that may apply to one but not the other. So building sort of that checklist and understanding of, okay, even if a project is managed by manager X versus manager Y, it's all being managed more or less in the same manner. So I was helping build all those tools, all those processes to ensure a successful portfolio for our company. So same thing, did that for a couple of years, and then moved on to a director role where I had not only project managers, but I was also now overseeing project coordinators, assistant project managers, and continuing to build that pipeline. At that point, I made a official transition over to our utility scale business. So I was, at that point, I started working on not just distributed generation projects, but also working on our utility scale projects. And in this case, when I say utility scale projects, these are large projects between 100 to 200 megawatts in size, so very large. So everything that I learned, that I applied the first 6 years or so, that helped me then start building up the knowledge that I needed for these utility scale projects. We're still building projects on ground mounts. The equipment doesn't really change, other than there's more equipment that is being added given the size of these projects. But as we were building that utility scale platform, based on all the processes, the tools, feedback loops that we implemented with all the internal teams at Sol Systems, I started building those same processes for utility scale and changing those processes as necessary to meet the demands of this other business within Sol Systems. And then earlier this year, I took on that associate vice president role. And so that has expanded some of my responsibilities. So it's not just construction that I'm overseeing now, it's quality, it's safety, and it's project control. So quality and safety, in the past, we typically relied heavily on our EPCs to ensure that projects are being built to quality, they're being built in a safe manner. We've brought that in-house now, and we have our quality and safety manager who oversees that and works very closely with EPCs to ensure that, okay, if there is any concern, any issue, that we're collaboratively working on that together to resolve, and we're not relying heavily on an external party to do that. And then project controls, that team is responsible for budget of these projects. These projects have, the utility scale projects have budgets of $100+ million. So how do we ensure that we're properly manage that budget for the duration of construction, which can be between 12 to 18 months? And then and project controls also oversees the schedule. So how do we ensure that EPC is following the schedule for the build of the project? And if there is a delay in any one aspect, understanding how does that ultimately impact the major milestones that we need to meet to ensure that this project is finished by, you know, contractual obligation dates that we've provided to our customers. So now the construction team has sort of grown into 3 different aspects, which again is construction itself, we're building the projects on site, project controls, which is monitoring budget and schedule, and quality and safety. So overseeing those teams and again, continuing to build processes. The more projects we have in our pipeline, the more projects we're building, the more it becomes necessary to ensure that we can automate as much as we can internally for administrative purposes so that we can focus on what's happening in the field. So continue to work with that. So I'll pause there. Charles, any questions before?
Any questions? Come on. Oh my God, I have so many questions. That is so wonderful. Thank you, Cynthia. We really appreciate that. I think I was unaware of how many states you guys were involved with, right? I mean, it sounds like you're in 38 states or something like that, which really feels like you are spanning from somewhere south of the Mason-Dixon line and up to the Canadian line or something. It just feels like it's hard to get 38 states without getting quite a geographic spread. Without looking at a map, how big of a spread are you doing? And how different is the solar resource from the northern extreme to the southern extreme? And how much does that matter? Right? Because if you can do a viable project in Massachusetts, and you can also, or let's do it the other way. If you do a viable project in Arizona where it is blazing sun, and then you can go to Massachusetts and still do a project, or Seattle and still do a project, how is that possible when the resource is so much less? Like, how do you explain that to people? Because they're going to look and they're going to say, wow, it just obviously doesn't work in the Northwest. But we know that not to be true. So how do you work through that?
Yeah, so for a lot of these projects, we are not just the owner, but the developer as well. So while we're developing these projects, we're having active discussions with several contractors. We call them EPCs, which stands for engineering, procurement, and construction. And these contractors are providing us with feedback to understand, okay, what is the cost for this date versus a different state that we may be considering? What are weather considerations that maybe we haven't thought about that these EPCs who are local to the areas understand better than we do? What are requirements from the county, from the state that they're familiar with that we need to understand better before we go into contracting? With a utility, if it's a utility we haven't worked with before and EPCs have experience understanding what are the requirements that they have, because not all utilities have the same requirements, not all states have the same requirements for building these projects. And then our internal team also has a lot of knowledge into incentives for these sites. So that's probably one of the biggest drivers as to where we work within the United States. If there is a very rich solar incentive program within a state, it makes it a lot easier for us to go in there and build a project based on pricing versus a state where an incentive program either doesn't exist or just doesn't allow the project to move forward financially. So it's a network. We have internal personnel who have built the knowledge so that we can work in California, Illinois, Nebraska, New Jersey, as well as the connections we've made with the different EPCs who we can tap and say, hey, we're considering a project in this area. Can you help us understand what are some things that we maybe haven't thought about that we should be thinking about as we continue to develop the project?
That's very helpful. I appreciate that. I'm going to jump around if it's okay with you a little bit. You mentioned EPCs and keeping EPCs on schedule, which obviously is important because of the way these, lines of credit are drawn down. The fact that these things may cost hundreds of millions of dollars, and we don't want to be sitting on expended capital too long before the operations date. What are some examples of the things that trip up EPCs most commonly, and how do you solve them?
Yeah. So definitely a lot of lessons learned when I started as a project manager here at Soul Systems. So when we are building a canopy, for example, one of the things that most tripped us up is underground risk. Did the contractor survey the land, or even a ground mount? Was there pile testing performed that gives us a good understanding of what's underground? Are we going to hit rock, shale? Is there water that we need to think about and consider as we're thinking about where piles and modules are going to be installed? And so we quickly learned that this is a discussion that we need to have very early on during the development and bid process so that the EPC understands, look, we as developer are doing X, Y, Z in order to understand the land, but you as a contractor who ultimately will sign up for the responsibility of this project need to go out there and perform your service as well to either validate our findings or let us know that no, there are areas that are of risk and we need to reconsider the design. There is nothing more difficult than going out to site with a finalized drawing only to find out that design needs to be changed. The earlier we can make changes to a design, the cheaper it is and the less it impacts the project schedule. So we've now worked with during our internal processes, we've worked with our engineering team to create checklists to validate, okay, here are the 50 things that we need to look at when we're building a canopy or we're building a ground mount or rooftop, whatever that project is, so that we're asking those questions very early on and having those very honest, transparent discussions with our EPCs to say, this is what we've identified. This is where we maybe need you to do a little bit more research yourself.
Excellent. Thank you. You mentioned that you had started with the residential side with Solar City, and then you moved into the utility scale. What translated well, and what was like oh wow, I have to learn this all over again? What are some surprises that you came across that others who are thinking of a similar path? Because it would not be uncommon for someone to say, what's the easiest way in? Do residential for a little while, got your teeth on that, get familiar, get your fluency with the technology and the development plan, etc. And then I'll jump over to utility scale. But what was one of those unexpected things that if people knew ahead of time, they would say, okay, while I'm doing my residential, I will be coming up to speed on this so that have an easier transition?
Yeah, so honestly, I think it was the soft skills where I had most to learn about. The technical, because I did jump from residential to distributed generation to utility scale. Again, inverters, you're going to need an inverter, you're going to need modules, you're going to need racking, whether that's on the roof or piles and racking for a ground mount. That isn't going to change. However, when you go from residential to distributed generation, now you also need to consider switch gear, panel boards, longer runs to the point of interconnection. And then when you move from distributed generation to utility scale, now you also have to consider step-up transformers. You have to think about connecting to substations and large gen ties, whether that's overhead or underground. So I think that progression was very straightforward, just because I was building that knowledge little by little as it went from, a very small system where, I maybe have 8 modules to a very large system where we have 70,000 plus modules installed. So that came relatively easy just because of that progression. And it just makes, sense as you're going through a small system to a larger system. The soft skills are where I really did have to familiarize myself a lot more and get comfortable with. So I think one big item there is the communication skills. When you're building a residential system, you're speaking to one person, the homeowner, and all that is being coordinated with them. When you're building a distributed generation site, if it's, let's say, an Amazon warehouse, now you're talking to their project manager, you're talking to their construction manager, you're talking to the facility, especially if you're going to shut down a facility. Now that involves several people within the facility to coordinate, okay, well, we're going to have to pause your work for 8 hours or 16 hours, whatever the shutdown requirements are. So it's a coordination with a lot more people. And then with utility scale, you may be building on land that belongs to, 30 different landowners. So now you have 30 different individuals that you need to coordinate with. And that's, for the construction, the actual build of the project. Now, there are separate stakeholders, the holders of the power purchase agreement, those who are actually buying the energy that the system is producing. If these projects are being built with liquidity from tax equity or debt, now you have to also speak to banks regarding progress and what they care about. So understanding who your audience is and what that messaging needs to be based on who the audience is was one thing that I really had to learn going from one type of project to another. While the ultimate message is the same, the way you word it may have to differ based on who you're speaking with, and building up that skill to be able to do that. That was probably one of, again, the biggest things that I recommend anyone who's looking to change, whether it's a sequential change like this one from a project coordinator to a vice president to switching from one type of job to another. It's understanding who are the stakeholders, how do you need to communicate with each one of them. The other one was project financing. So in construction, you think technical, you think, understanding equipment and how does energy flow and, wiring. But as projects grow in size, it's very important that you understand project financing. Where is the money coming from to build these projects? What's the ROI? Who do you need to report based on those financing needs? And how do you need to keep track of the project budget for the duration of the project itself? So not necessarily need to be an expert in financing, but have a good understanding that when you are speaking with the financing folks, you understand what they're referring to, what they're saying, what they're trying to get across for construction to consider.
That's super helpful. You're speaking from a specific perspective, which is pretty darn senior, right? I mean, you, right? And so you know a lot more about all these elements than the typical person, I would argue, because there's only one project manager on a project, right? Or maybe a small team. There's only one senior project manager. There's only one, director or whatever in that chain. And so you're not necessarily sharing that across roles, but you can see how in the team there's going to be a kind of a consistent level of understanding. And then one person, such as yourself, is going to ascend to the top of that next one. Along the way, there's on job training for understanding these things. And before that, there's a certain amount of schooling that you need. You went back and got your master's. Is that where you picked up some of this stuff, or how much of it was on the job?
Yeah, so I would say it was probably 50-50.
Oh,
So
wow.
understanding the communication skills, I started learning that through school, because my degree was on engineering management. Engineers tend to have, this. People usually think engineers, we don't like to talk to anyone. We're pretty solitary. We think about math and science, and we don't think about people skills. So that degree was actually very focused on building up communications from an engineering perspective. But I think because since day one, I made it very clear to Soul Systems and the leadership team, look, I'm jumping into this project coordinator role. I eventually want to become a project manager and continue to build up my career from there. Soul Systems, and one of the reasons why I've been in the company for just over 9 years now, is because they said, great, how do we help you make that happen? And so it was, my manager saying, hey, as you're looking into a potential senior project manager role, or you're looking at director role, as I continue to move up, he was giving me tips. Hey, I think you should talk to this group and learn a little bit about financing. You should talk to asset management and learn a little bit about long-term management of these projects. Let's get you on a meeting with our CEO so that you can understand how he's thinking about the business. So he was helping me build that path so that I built up the necessary knowledge to continue to grow within my career. And then anything that I came up with, hey, I learned this from school. Can you help me understand this better? Or, hey, I'm looking at, videos or taking a class from SEI, help me understand this concept better. So it's been both.
I think I love your manager. Right? I mean, that is the definition of a good manager. There's a book out there that we're reading in our Rise Here group called Multipliers, right? And it's all about managers like that take someone like you and make you more than you were before, as opposed to saying you can't do that, you shouldn't do that, that's not your place. It's saying, how do I make you confident to take the next step? That is such a good manager. And I think people who watch this should just recognize that that's who you want to work for. And if you're in a toxic space where they're trying to hold you down, or they're trying to take credit for your work, or whatever it is, move on. Find a place where you belong, where you have this kind of support, where you can grow. It's such a great story. I love that. That's amazing. I think the other thing that we've noticed, it's neat to see you come out of Fresno, because I think of Fresno as being kind of an engineering school, like, I don't know, Rutgers or whatever, that kind of thing. Then there's groups that are more like James Madison University. That's a teaching school. And this is where REpowering Schools is kind of headquartered. And they have an integrated science and technology curriculum and degree, frankly, which is much more broad-based. It is the opposite, not the opposite, but it's much more big picture. And so those folks naturally roll into these kind of project and program management roles because they think big picture like you do, but you did it brick by brick. You did it very decisively, deliberately, which is so cool. So I think that's a nice message to send to engineers that, engineering students who are in more traditional programs, that just because you are studying something very specific doesn't mean that you cannot have access to these bigger picture things. It just takes work and exposure and good managers, to give you the opportunity, which I think is just wonderful. So thank you for sharing that. That's really huge. I'm curious a little bit. One piece that's in the narrative quite a bit these days is data centers, right? And that they're going to be huge consumers of energy. And it's not just like, like a city, but cities do go to sleep usually. I mean, they go down to 30% of max power or whatever at 2 a.m. And then they slowly work their way up to max power in the evening. And whereas data centers, they don't go to sleep. And if they do go to sleep, they go to sleep at 200 megawatts at a time. And then they turn back on 200 megawatts. You're like, oh my God, who designed a system to work like that? Like, what moron was so out of it that they just gave it a switch? Like, that's terrible. So in that context, we're all worried about data centers and energy, and we're worried about data centers running on gas or coal. So we're thinking about nuclear. They 200 megawatts, as you know better than anybody else, take a lot of land. We're talking 1,000 acres or more. Is that even feasible around data centers, or should we just expect that data centers are going to be where they put them, and we're going to have to do kind of carbon offsetting elsewhere for those data centers? How do we do that? Do you see a role for solar, the nexus of solar and data centers?
Absolutely. So a lot of these data centers, and we as a developer, as I'm sure many other developers are doing, we're reaching out to these large companies who are building these very large data centers and having those discussions. A lot of these data centers are being built away from cities, as they should be, where there is actually a lot of available land that will remain after the facility is built. So surrounding that by solar, there's also the opportunity for virtual power purchase agreements where we don't necessarily build the solar right next to the facility to interconnect, but we built it in a location where land is available. And then the companies are buying the credits from what that system is building, so that they are, more or less procuring from clean energy. There is a large push for identifying land that would otherwise be unusable. And that would require some modifications to how we build. There have been instances, for example, where we've built systems that require ballasts, which are long concrete blocks, versus driving piles into the ground, just because the soil itself doesn't allow for that. So being creative as to how you can do it in targeting those land areas that are otherwise unusable for other means allow us to build solar to support these large data centers that are going up. Solar is definitely going to play a huge role in powering those facilities. Sorry, Charles, you're on mute.
Thank you. Batteries are another thing that people are talking about, and they're, folks are putting in 50, 100 megawatt batteries with 75, 150 megawatt solar arrays. What is how does that look from your perspective? Like, what's driving that? Is that to give them sort of a smoother output during cloud passage? Is it arbitrage? Is it what's driving that? And where do you see that going? And what does the ratio look like? They're not storing it all, right?
That's right. So it's a little bit of everything. So one big push for batteries is for reliability. And reliability can mean a few different things. Weather, we obviously need very sunny days for systems to produce. That doesn't mean that during a cloudy day the system is not producing. It's just producing.
What happened? Well, I'm not sure if we lost Cynthia or if it's me or what it is, but that's a little sad because she was in the middle of telling us a great story. So given that, I guess I should sign off, given that we've lost our speaker. And Cynthia, in your absence, I wanted to say thank you so much for joining us today. And to anyone viewing this, Cynthia just has such a cool example of a linear career where she has been very deliberate and has stacked her skills along the way and worked with the expertise of others to ensure that, she uh, that they who may know better what she needs next in order to proceed to the next step, um, has shared that with her and made sure that she has what she needs. That is the definition of a manager. And those of you that are going to be stepping into careers and have managers, I think it's really important to just, sometimes it's okay to put up with someone who is not a great manager because you learn things. And sometimes it is okay to look for a better fit for yourself, because not every company or every manager is going to be where you belong. And it's important for your own personal and professional growth to be where you can flourish as opposed to struggle under something less than great. And Cynthia, I think, is such a nice example of working for a company that obviously has taken great pains to support her and cultivate her and help her be their leadership in the future. And part of what I think was really great about Cynthia's story was she came in early and said, I know I want to be a programmer, project manager. I want to have more of a leadership role. How do I do that? And that her management, rather than feel challenged or intimidated or threatened by somebody who says, I want your job. How do I get your job? They said, I can help you have my job because when you take my job, I get to go up a step. Or if you're better at my job than I am, then you deserve to have my job, which is all good. So I think that just shows tremendous, and I don't mean to talk up Soul Systems too much, but I think it shows tremendous maturity and professionalism with that company. And it just shows when you take somebody who's driven and capable and clear and disciplined like Cynthia, that you can make it go. Oh, look at that. Cynthia's back. And Cynthia, if you can hear me, I think you'll come back in a second. I was singing your praises. I hope that's all right. I was
No.
going on and on about how great your company was and how great you were. And
No, thanks for filling in, Charles. I
yeah,
apologize. My internet went down, so I had to hop over to my phone.
yeah, that's totally fine. What I shared, I don't need to share it necessarily. I'll give you the Reader's Digest version. I just said that it's such a brilliant and heartwarming example of you coming in and saying, I know who I want to be. I've got a long vision of where I want to go. And that your managers and the people along the way were not intimidated by that or threatened by that, but instead were like, cool. If we help this person, she can be our leadership. She can be our person. She can take care of us. She can take care of our company. How do we make this happen? And that is just, there are examples of that out there. And people are not gonna find that every time. But when they find that, they need to know that that's a company and a group they should grow with. And when they find themselves, right, and they find themselves in a place where somebody is not a multiplier, and instead they tend to take credit for your work, hold you down so they can maintain their status quo, then you learn as much from that person and you have no guilt about moving on. You just go and find a better situation. And I'm so grateful that you found your feet in your company, because they deserve you. And that's just incredible. So thank you, Cynthia, very much for the amazing story you've shared with us today. It's just insane. Okay, so we do have a couple minutes left. And I was going to ask you to validate some of my observations or invalidate them. You're allowed to invalidate them. Number one is in batteries, more and more, it feels like folks are using string inverters on the batteries. Like that the PV string inverter, there's so many of them out there that industry has just exploded. And if you needed a grid following inverter, why wouldn't you go to a string inverter? And so it's really interesting to see these little 200-watt inverter, 200 kilowatts, sorry, 210s or whatever they are, it's little string inverters sitting underneath each stack of batteries, you know, in a container. The question is, why would someone like SunGrow, and this may be out of your comfort zone, but why would somebody like SunGrow have a black start capability? What is the case for black start capability on a solar inverter?
Yeah, so
It's
I'll answer with my perspective. So I think it's something that a lot of people are starting to look at as well. So when we have a central inverter go down, that is powering or helping, transitioning that DC power into AC power for a very large part of the system, several megawatts. If we're using string inverters and an inverter goes down, the impact to the system is a lot less than if we're having a large central inverter go down. So that's the consideration. I think what we now as an industry need to figure out is, does it make economical sense to do so? Do the costs of using, hundreds of string inverters versus a few central inverters for a system, does that outweigh the costs that we anticipate in the future for maintenance of these systems or loss of energy based on central inverters? Central inverters also tend to be more difficult to power up again once we've had an issue with them. Where string inverters, the industry is more familiar with. There are certain spare parts that we can have these in storage. It's a lot simpler to switch one string inverter with another than it is to do that with a central inverter.
That makes sense. That's a good answer. And then two more questions. We recently were involved in a project where we were doing a transition for a coal economy. So it was a mountaintop coal facility, and they were putting a few hundred megawatts of solar on it. Tough geotechnical conditions, right? It is hard rock and it's just up and down. But that said, the cool thing about these mines is they sit on all these transmission lines, and they all have these 80 or 100 megawatt substations that are sitting doing nothing because the mine is over. Is Soul Systems looking at that at all? Have you thought about the transition and supporting that space? And do you see unique challenges to that?
So there actually have been a couple of articles. So we have a project that is active construction right now, that it's being built on top of old mines. So we're certainly not shy at that. I think that goes back to my previous comment about land that would otherwise be unusable for other purposes, and taking advantage of that and building solar on it. So it does require a bit more engineering upfront, because now we have to consider, okay, what if there's a collapse? The land we may not be able to disturb the land as much. So what racking system do we need to consider if there is a larger slope than, a typical racking system would support? So there's a little bit more upfront work required, but we're certainly not shy about it. And I think that's the right way to move going forward to take advantage of those lands.
Oh, I love that. That's a great answer. And then communities that are hosting projects like that, to what degree can they work with you and the EPC to not import all 500 jobs, but import 200 jobs or something like that. Like, how hard is that to, make that happen? That just seems complicated. Doesn't happen all that often, but it'd be nicer to happen more. So how do you make it happen more?
Yeah, so during the development phase, we're also looking to understand what the labor look like. When we're talking to our EPCs, that's a big push. How can we support communities further by ensuring that they have an opportunity to work on these projects that we're building? It guarantees jobs for, again, 12 to 18 months during construction, but as well as what other activities within the community can we support? Is there a center that students use for learning purposes that we can support further to enhance equipment that they have in there, or provide personnel that can maybe go and speak and teach individuals. So it's a little bit of both, and it's something that we consider quite a bit and discuss very early on to support the communities that we're building in as much as we possibly can.
That's awesome. And it seems very compatible with the Soul Systems mindset. Yeah, that's so cool. Last question, linear arrangements. So that comes up every once in a while. Somebody's like, why don't we put them down the median of an interstate? Why don't we put them on a canal? And we've seen a couple canal projects where they're capping, like even the Central Arizona project is now considering covering the canal. How far does that? Is that a crazy idea, or is it, no, it just, the economics are a little different and you gotta be okay with that?
Yeah, it's definitely not a crazy idea. I think, again, everybody's trying to be creative and think about, okay, how do we ensure that we can continue building solar without impacting so much land, or using land that would otherwise not be used for anything else. And canals, areas like that are an option. I think you're absolutely right. It's now thinking about the economics and what changes in technology may be necessary, because now you're building on top of a body of water. Similar to, when we started with PV originally for ground mounts, rooftops, and so on, and then BESS is learning, okay, what are the basics that we need to understand to ensure that this is a field that can continue to grow within the renewable space.
That's amazing. Well, Cynthia, again, now I'll thank you personally instead of just thanking your memory. Because that's what I did before. I just want to say thank you so much from the bottom of our hearts for Repowering Schools. These kinds of sessions with people like you, it humanizes the topic. It makes it more clear that there is a career path, that coming in as an undergrad, there's a way, and you just got to take it one step at a time. And the fun thing is that a lot of these students, for me to do a partial differential equation, are you kidding me? I cannot remember how to do that. But the students remember that, right? Because they're still in that system, right? And so they just need to know that, you got into Calc 3 or whatever it was because you took Calc 1. And it's just, jobs are just like that. You just got to start at one end and work your way out the other. So again, thank you very much for your time. We're very grateful. There is our last session next week, and you can jump on the Repowering Schools to see who that is, because I forget, it's too much of a struggle for me to broadcast again, but because we're out of time mostly. But tune in next week for the next call. But again, Cynthia, thank you so much. And anyone who's going to Leadership Forum, I'm sure they'll look you up, and they'll be very lucky to do that. So incredible. Good for you. And Remy will be there, so she'll thank you in person and give you a piece of chocolate or something.
No problem.
Thank
you for hosting me. It's been great. I look forward to hearing from anyone who wants to reach out.
Yes, thank you so much. We really appreciate you. Take care.
All right. Yep. Bye.
Okay. Bye.